Ronald Reagan is the #1 fan of Avatar.
You heard it here first. Write that down. Yes.
This is the most insane statement. Another sentence that has never been said in human history.
Hello, welcome to the Fangirl Feels podcast. My name's Tanya. We're the podcast where we dish about all the books, TV shows, and movies that we're obsessed with. And today I'm here with my co-host,
Olivia. My name's Olivia.
Welcome to the Fangirl Feels podcast.
Welcome to the podcast. I never know how to introduce my name. I feel like I'm like, Olivia? Question mark?
Is that my name?
Is that me? I don't know. I'm not sure. But it is. This is I.
So every week we meet to talk about the things that we're obsessed with, things that we're into. Today specifically, we're going to be talking about Legendborn, the book. But before we get into that, we want to talk about things that we've been consuming over the past week. And so, Olivia, what have you been into over the past week?
Yeah. So, I mean, Legendborn. I actually was reading that this week, which has been good. I am watching Shark Tank, as always. I am a known Shark Tank fan. I am, anti-capitalist, but somehow will eat Shark Tank up. Don't ask me how it works. Yeah, to be honest, it's really the main thing I've been watching is Shark Tank. I also obviously partook in the Met Gala as a professional critic yesterday, May 6th. I was, my opinions were highly desired by everybody.
Yeah, I saw you on E! News, right?
Yes, yeah, professional. So that's what I've been up to. What about you?
That's really cool. I only got into the Met Gala until like later in the evening when I was just literally just looking at what Zendaya wore mostly. And then of course, I think she like co-hosted it. So
yes,
she's great. And then but throughout the week, Legendborn, we'll get into this, but I do think that this book is something that you should read as opposed to listen to, because I started listening to it and like last year and I couldn't get into it, but once I started reading, it was easier to get into. I just think there's a lot that happens that is easily consumable via reading. And so I've been reading that. It took me a while and I didn't finish until last night for this discussion. And then I also finished Baby Reindeer. It's like a hit show on Netflix about a comedian. I'm a comedian myself, so like watching comedian shows, I'm like, sometimes I don't want to see that. It's like I live this at this very moment. So, but the show's good. It's just very dark, so I wouldn't recommend it to you. I don't think you should watch it. I think it's too dark.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like my vibe, but I get it.
Yeah, I've had to tell so many friends like it's beautiful, but you shouldn't watch it.
Yeah, that's fair. You're a good recommender that way, because sometimes people just recommend what they like, and that's not always correct.
No,
you're
I'm a good friend for saying that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then we started the show called Sugar with Colin Farrell, who I love his Irish accent typically, but in the show he has an American accent, and there are times he reminds me of Andrew Scott's accent when Andrew Scott played Ripley in a show also on Netflix. And so it's just funny comparing two Irish actors, American accents. They sound very similar.
People are very good. I've noticed that British people are better. I don't know if Irish is considered British. They're not. That's not how geography works. But I've just noticed people of that region are better at coming to American accents than Americans are at like British and other accents. It's easier for them, I feel like.
I've seen actors talk about this and they would agree. Like it's just easier for them to mimic the American accent versus it's hard for us to get rid of the R's. We just can't get rid of those.
No. Our accent is too strong.
Buongiorno. Yeah.
Buongiorno. Yeah, we can't soften it. It's true. It's funny. You said that Legendborn was easier for you to get into via book. This just goes to show I tried to read this book via book, like physical book. Read this book via book. Last year, the book.
Make that a sticker. Sorry.
I tried to read this book via book, the method of book, and I couldn't get into it actually. But I'm also somebody who I am like a mood reader. It's what I would call like I have to be in a very particular mindset. So that was part of the problem. So I had an easier time this time doing via audio, and then I transitioned into the physical book again. But the audio book helped me kind of break that barrier. But I was also just more receptive to it this time, I think.
That's true. You are a mood reader. When your mood ring says read, that's when you start. I understand.
To be honest, 100%. That's exactly it. If I'm not mentally in the right headspace, I'm like, I cannot. This is the worst book I've ever read. And it objectively is not, but I just cannot read it. It's crazy, actually.
That is funny. We were opposite. Yeah. In how we approach this. But that is a good segue to talk about the topic of this discussion, this episode, one of 4 episodes. So we're starting a read along. It's new for us. And we wanted to find a way that readers can keep up with a book that we're consuming. And then also there's not like a hard time constraint. Because we're breaking it up into 4 parts, you only need to read like 100 to 200 pages per week. And so we're doing this asynchronously with you. We would love for you to keep along, meaning that you're not a part of this discussion, but hopefully you would like to be. Please leave us comments. We're going to be posting to our Instagram. You can keep up with our news about this there. And we would love for you to leave us notes about what you'd like us to bring up in the subsequent episodes. We didn't do it for this episode, but for the next one, we'll leave a post where you can leave comments about what you'd like us to bring up, because we want you to do this with us. And then if you really, really want to participate, we are thinking of doing a live show, a live recording via Zoom or Google Meets. And if we get enough interest, and if you let us know that you'd like to be a part of that, we'll be doing that the week of June 7th, but TBD. If we don't get enough interest, we might try and market that more. So here's the dates to keep up. This episode, you're listening to this now, so it's May 10th. Hello, future us. How's it going? Is life okay? Hello. I hope so. Part 2 is going to be May 17th. Part 3, May 31st. And like I mentioned, we're aiming for the week of June 7th for that live episode, if we get enough interest. So anyways, the reason we wanted to do this was because we've been told by other people that we should read this book. And like we mentioned, we tried to do it last year because it's so popular that it grew in popularity during 2020, but we just couldn't get into it initially. And now that we're reading it, we really love it. And it's a woman of color Black lead, which is super rare in fantasy. And so we were excited to start this.
Stay tuned for those episodes if you want to be involved. And if this has been on your TBR, and you want to read it like it has been on ours, I feel like this is a good way to break it up. I felt like the first part was very accessible, didn't feel tough at all. So hopefully it will be for you as well.
And also, we didn't plan that. We just picked this book and then found out it had parts. How smart are maybe time is not linear, and future Tanya and Olivia are looking out for us. I think
we're crazy smart. That's really what it was. Yeah. Yes. We just have time travel abilities, foresight. I don't know.
We're going to break this out into chronological order. But before we do that, every time we talk about a book or a movie or something that we're deep diving, we do a short little deep dive into the author and how this work came to be. Legendborn is a 2020 debut young adult fantasy novel, which Olivia and I mostly read. That's all we read. Sorry to all the self-help books out there, but that's what we read. It's called a modern day twist on an Arthurian legend. It follows a Black teenage girl who discovers a secret of a historically white magic society. It's a part of a series, so hopefully we might keep reading this. If you guys like this book, we'll probably keep doing it. And it was released on September 15th, 2020. Tracy Deonn, the writer, she grew up in North Carolina, which is fitting for the story that takes place in North Carolina. And she devoured fantasy books growing up, as well as Southern food in equal measure. Love that. We love food. And when she's not writing, Tracy reads fanfic. And I thought Olivia's more of the fanfic reader here. And isn't that cool? We should be her friend.
Honestly, I realized that a lot of modern day writers are just like us. They're really just like they're just like us. They wrote fan fiction, they fangirled. It gives me hope that I am also capable of doing these things, because they're very similar. We all grew up the same.
It's so true. And shout out to our previous episode with Haley Whiteley, the writer. I felt like we're all just besties on a call.
I felt that way too. And she was very similar also. We all had similar roots, the Twilight girlies that just became fangirls.
We're all fangirls. Lastly, I do just want to mention it's a pretty important theme in the book. Tracy was influenced by the death of her mother when writing this book. And I think that's a good segue to like starting this book and like our thoughts on it, because I felt like she did such an incredible job explaining what it's like to go through that sort of grief. Even though I personally have never gone through that type and level of grief, it's palpable. You can sense it, and you feel strongly for this main character right away. And so with that, we can just go over our initial thoughts, and then we'll go into chronological order of our thoughts throughout part one. So Olivia, what did you think about the book?
Yeah, no, I agree. Like I said, this is my second attempt at this book, and I am known, like I said, to not always, I need to be in the right headspace. Like most famously, 6 of Crows took me, I think, 3 tries to get into it, and it is now my favorite book. So my first attempt at books is not always very good, right? So I'm really enjoying it. Now that I'm like fully into it, I'm really liking it. It's totally up my alley of books. I actually have continued reading past part 1. Last night I finished part 1 like midday, and then at night I read a little bit more. So I am really enjoying it. It's refreshing from some of those romanticities I've been reading. Having a Black lead character, to your point, should not be as unique as it is, but it is unique, and I really appreciate it. And I do appreciate how she uses, like, how race is involved in the book. I think it is very like enlightening, and you can tell it's coming from somebody who has experienced this herself. And yeah, I'm really liking it. It kind of reminds me of Shadowhunters. I don't know if you've ever read those books.
No, I never did.
Shadowhunters was a very popular series back in the day, and it's like a kind of a similar vibe in which it's like takes place in modern day. And they're these kids who are shadow hunters, like they hunt demons. It's more complicated than that, but this idea that like there is this other world that like humans cannot see, but these special people can see, very similar. So kind of reminds me of that.
That's really cool. I would love to hear what she was inspired by, because throughout this analysis, I've thought of like certain things that it reminded me of that I wonder if she pulled from, or they all have like, what are those called? Like folklore, legends, cryptids that all these books kind of pull from. But we'll get into it. But yeah, I was gonna say too that like in terms of like the romanticy aspect, right away when we meet Selwyn, he kind of reminds me of the obvious male leads from like Twilight, in ACOTAR, Rhysand, and then Zayden Ryerson from Fourth Wing, which I like. I think that's fine. And he has like also like smoke involved with his magic. But I mean, I think that helped with like the being able to digest the book. Like it just was reminiscent of other things. And so I think that always helps people consume it. And also I don't know if you'll have to tell me because I'm not as familiar, if there's like a genre of like magical school books, shows are just so much fun. Like I think that's why people liked Wednesday so much. Like a bunch of weirdos, found families, kids learning about their powers along with everyone else. Like what came to mind was obviously Harry Potter, a spin-off of The Boys called Gen V, and then obviously Fourth Wing and Percy Jackson. So I was curious, like, is that a genre?
I think it is. It has to be. I mean, even Shadowhunters is like that too. They're part of this like institute. I think people just like to feel like they have a community, even if it's fictional. I think we create these fictional worlds that we feel like a part of. So I think we've also romanticized the idea of school as a society. I think because it's like a place where we all go every day and you are with similar people. So I think it's just like an easy plot device in terms of books, is what I would guess. Just a good way to like get people all in one place all the time.
That's a good term for it. The
Yeah.
plot device, I suppose, of it that can exist in like these other storylines. Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's relatable to kids. Like a lot of these are, young adult or middle grade books. Fourth Wing is not, but like Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, these are all like younger books. So it's a good way to get people to understand too, maybe.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk first about the prologue and the introduction, and then we'll move into the subsequent nights. It's funny that the first part mostly takes part over the course of like 3 to 4 days. She like just got there, and I think that's it's kind of fun. I think that speaks to how quickly and how easily it is to get into this once you get past like the prologue.
Yeah, you're right. I actually didn't even realize that, but you're totally right. This is just 3 days in. Except for the initial prologue of her mom's accident. The rest of it is like 3 days. Yeah, that's crazy.
Jump straight into it. So we'll talk about the prologue first. And I also am curious if you know why writers do this. Like there's important information in the prologue that is intended for people to read. And I'm curious like why it's in the prologue and not the first chapter. I'm just curious. But I'll go over and then, if you have an answer, I don't know. Have you ever thought about that?
I haven't, but that's actually, I do think about that sometimes because I think traditionally I would sometimes skip the prologue. Like, I think there were moments in time where I've skipped prologue. So I don't know. That's actually a good point. Maybe people just feel like it's not part of the book because it takes place so much, like in the same way that there's an epilogue, right? Like where there might be like months or years in between. Maybe it's just another device of like separating time. Maybe that would be my best guess.
That's a good hypothesis. Yeah.
Yeah.
We should ask our now writer friends. We should ask them.
Why is there prologues and epilogues? Epilogues are always the same too. They're always like months, like 2 years later.
Yeah.
You know, the famous Harry Potter one. So I don't know, 19 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe.
Which, by the way, tangentially related, I never read the Twilight books after the second one. And when she's in her depressive state, I guess Stephenie Meyer, she had a bunch of blank pages, and I guess that was like unheard of. And I just saw a meme about that she was like so ahead of her time. And I actually really like that as like an artistic way to do that. What did you think of that?
Oh yeah, it killed me as like a teenage girl reading that, like 15 years old, being like, oh my god, months have passed and Edward's not here. Yeah, it is really good. I saw like a Threads post that was like, you wouldn't last an hour in the asylum where they raised me, and it was like the picture of that of like the months, the blank pages. I was like, yeah, she killed it with that one. She really did.
We are hive mind because I think I saw it from maybe you reposting it.
Maybe. Yeah, because I'm like, I saw this exact thing. And then I was someone else just saying like she was like, you don't know how like hard she went with these blank pages. I'm like, yeah, she did.
But anyways, prologue. Definitely read it. Also, as you should know, there's going to be a bunch of spoilers. We're just going to talk about everything. But prologue, we go over her mom's death, the car accident, and you get some foreshadowing about magic. I kind of knew right away that there was something iffy about it, just the way she was describing that his face shimmers when she's talking about the cop who tells her that her mom had passed away in a car accident. She also goes on to say, little metal details on his chest ripple and shine like loose silver change at the bottom of the fountain. Nothing about him appears solid or real. And my brain right away thought, oh, okay, this isn't real. I don't know why. I hadn't even read the rest of the book yet. And my brain's like, yep, whoa. I was raised by Lost. And I just solved the clues. And I happen to be right. But
good for you. I did not notice that at all. I did not notice that. So good for you. That's surprising.
Yeah. And so later on we find, and we'll go over this, that she realizes that image in her mind, that memory was probably mesmered and fabricated.
Mm-hmm.
But initially, also right away, I love that this writer brings up themes that pop up throughout this book of race, heritage, grief, and family. It's almost like the central themes that keep everything together, that keep me going reading this book. So we learn a little bit about, of course, her mom passing away, her accident, and the grief that she goes through, and also her father. And it eventually leads to her wanting to leave to go to this program. It's at UNC Chapel Hill's early college program with her best friend Alice, who I believe is Taiwanese American from context clues. And I love this section, this quote that I pulled from the book. But her wanting to leave to go to college and kind of leave her smaller hometown eventually leads to this core memory she has of her mother passing away. And so I love this quote that I pulled from the book that I think does a good job of explaining her mindset and like how she's thinking about grief and how like she's kind of stuck in a time period from when her mom passed away. But the writer wrote, "Blood red twine connects the final words I said to my mother last night in anger to another night in February." And that's connecting when she was talking to Alice about like wanting to join the program to her final fight with her mom. And she just has connected that like the fact that if she had never wanted to go to this program, perhaps her mom would still be there, or they wouldn't have been in a fight. Her final words wouldn't have been in anger. And so she's kind of stuck in this state of grief. And it does lead to her, you know, increasing her want and need to leave. I was curious what you thought about the prologue.
These are really great points, because I honestly didn't notice. I understood the like connection between, you know, her, obviously the fight that she had with her mom was her wanting to apply to this program and her mom said no. And then her mom dying afterwards. But it's just interesting, the way you phrased it is really interesting. I mean, even in the book, she refers to everything that happens after her mom dies. Like, she refers to herself as like the after Bree, I think, like, which is really interesting. Another way of like just talking about grief, that you become like you're just someone different after something like that happens to you. And like after Bree is going to this college now, and she's trying to escape it. She's trying to move forward. She's a different person. And constantly throughout the book, she's always really trying not to sit in the memory of her grief. Like, she's always bottling it away and trying to move forward by being at this school.
Yeah, the writer, that's such a good point. The after Bree, the way she kind of separates herself into two people. This writer, Tracy, she does such a good job of like the imagery of this book. Like, I feel like I understand, and I'm not her. And yeah. I thought she did a good job of with that, like that empathy, the sympathy there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to illustrate it. Having, not experienced a grief like that, but understanding that that's such a significant moment that you do just become someone else. There is another, it is the after one, after you. Like, there was the before with her mom, and there's the after without her mom. And that's really tough, but that's how she has to segment it in her mind.
So it fast forwards to her leaving to go to UNC for the program. And I'll go over at a high level what happens, then we'll break it down by sections within this first night. And so first night, her and Alice get talked into going to a jump, which is like a part of like the heritage of the school, the culture of the school. The first night, the first years go on this dangerous jump that Alice doesn't want to go on because that's trespassing, and they're new to this program. I'm Team Alice in this situation. She goes on to meet Selwyn and Tor, and we'll deep dive into that in a second. They meet in a way that I found interesting, of just like by chance they ran into each other. And then we learn a little bit about the magic system. The author Tracy exposes it in an interesting way. We learn about e-cells. And then lastly, day one ends with them in a cop car. So much happens on their first night, and at night too. Like, all of this happens towards the end of their day.
These kids, man, getting into messy situation. End up in the back of a cop car. It took me a second to realize that she's in an early college program. I know, like, we talked about it, but I, for some reason, just thought that she was in college, but she's actually 16. She's in an early college program, which I wonder why that was the decision that was made. I wonder, like, what the reasoning behind that is. Like, why not just going to college versus being in this early college program? I wonder if that will be answered. I'm not sure. But meeting Selwyn, what you were saying earlier, I was like, oh, this is is this the like lead male character? You know, we gotta get introduced to them early on, the unsettlingly beautiful male character. Like, okay, there we go.
Right away, I was like, hello, Rysand, Xaden, Edward too, like Edward. This mysterious like boy who just appears in a meadow. Stephanie Meyers had this dream.
She did. They always do, and they're always like described the same. He has a face aristocratic and sharp, high, pale. It's always the high cheekbones, ink black hair. I wrote a Threads post about this where it's like, where are the male leads that are not jet black hair? You know, I want a blonde, a redhead. Get us someone else. But I'm not that upset about this. It's fine.
Please paste that into when you edit this. That's so funny. And people's responses to, like, yes, please.
Yeah.
We need it switched up.
Yeah, it's always black hair. Why? Why is that?
Black, but they're not brown humans. Like, because we need that too. We need that representation of like Arab, South Asian male leads, but no, they're like, at least he's like light skinned, like she wrote that out, but definitely Xaden and Rhysand are ambiguously olive.
Oh yeah, they're ambiguously olive. I love that. So ambiguously.
They're Italian. I don't know.
They're just some sort of brown, but we're unclear as to what they are exactly. And this has a point. Like our lead main character, she's black, and that's part of her experience. And people in this society are clearly all white. So there's a point to this. But in those books, it was just like, the main characters are all white, and then we need someone that's not white. Tan. Olive skin.
And the disfigured one is gonna have red hair.
Yeah, oh yes.
Lucian.
There we go. This feels like that's racist.
Right. I know. Irish people, how do you feel about that?
How do we feel about this? Yeah, we just need a little bit. Like, black hair is great, but we just need a little bit more. A little more.
And I thought that too, and then I was like, she wrote this before 2020, so it makes sense. It was like fitting for the time.
Yeah, it was.
When this was all like that type of male character was like blowing up. But yeah. I also think it's funny that he has like silver smoke powers, which hello Rhysand again, and then Xaden. And then so I don't know if you caught on to this, but so like there's always a scent. There's always a scent for male characters in these books. And it's typically like literally every time it's like pine, leather, mint, citrus, sometimes lavender. And so she writes when she can smell Selwyn, she writes, "It floods my mouth and nose with dizzying scents, a bit of smoke followed by cinnamon." And then if anyone, which you should read if you haven't read Throne of Glass, the way that she wrote Rowan, whenever Aelin misses Rowan or she sensed that he's around, she smells snow and pine, just like the city where he's from called Terrason. So there's a theme here, and I don't know why it just keeps showing up.
I notice that all the time too. And I'm like, when in my real life have I ever smelled a man like this? I have never smelled a man like this.
Period. When have I smelled them?
When have I smelled a man? I don't know. But I did, even in this last book I was reading, same. It's like, it's always cinnamon or pine or cedar. It's always some like woodsy scent. I don't know. I don't get it. And I feel like I don't ever smell men like this, but it does create like a third or a fourth sense while reading the book, or I guess a second sense. It does like allow for some more like depth to the character to some extent, but I do feel like it's always the same. It's always the same notes.
I think that these writers are business girlies and they think ahead, because now there's candles for, I think, Rowan and Rhysand, and there should be one for Selwyn. So we do get introduced to the magic system. We're exposed to it. I really love how she does this. I honestly, okay, as I was like writing this all out, I couldn't think of many negatives, at least for part one. I just like really love how she introduced this all to us. This world, this magic system, this magic world. So before I talk about what happened in the story, I do just want to bring up that Tracy Deonn was inspired because she had worked in video games. And so she took that knowledge to help her develop the stringent rules that guide the magical system described in the book. And we love that because we're constantly inspired by our full-time jobs as user experience professionals.
Yeah, that's interesting. That I always love to see how people take their other inspirations or their other jobs to like come in. Like, even like Haley Whiteley last week, when we were talking to her, she said a similar thing, like her work in engineering. And you know, it's always, that's where creativity comes from. It's like paying attention to things around you. It really is. It's
so true. Yeah. It's like, it's almost a talent to be able to connect your worlds together. And it only makes your writing stronger.
Yeah, for sure. It's a talent. I think it's like a skill you can like work on, but that's the difference. It's like people who are trying, I think people think, like we talk about this all the time, that creativity comes out of thin air, when that's quite the opposite. It actually never comes out of thin air. It's always piece from here, piece from there. It's like you are the puzzle maker, or you're putting together a puzzle. It's not out of nothing.
It's developed over time.
Yes.
Yeah, and refined.
Exactly.
So we get introduced right away to magic in terms of she notices like a floating thing in the air. She asks the other boys, like, do you see that? And they say, no. Are you drunk? or hi? And she says, no, I see it. And so she sees what we learn is an ecell, and it looks like a possum with wings. And we don't really know, like we're learning this as she's learning it, which is really cool in a book. And so we learn that he's feeding up aggression. Selwyn says, you found yourself a spark of aggression and blew on it until it became a feast. And this reminded me of Stephen King's Outsider. I didn't read the book, but I watched a show on HBO, and they have a monster, spoiler alert for that show, called El Cuco, which is a grief eater. So it eats grief, and it shows up when there's a lot of grief in a town. And it'll try and kill people so it can keep eating the grief off their family members. It's a ghost-like monster found in Latin American folklore. And I just wanted to bring that up because I was so curious if she was inspired by folklore to write these monsters. She also noticed, this is towards the end of this chapter, but she notices the magic shimmers and recognizes it from her altered memory, which in which in the second day, she connects that maybe her memory was altered, because as she's walking away, Selwyn does a mesmer and tries to erase her memory, which she regains back, which I think is correlated to pain. I'm not sure. That is TBD. But one thing I think is important to mention before we move on to the second day is that the ecell says, not my gate, when Selwyn asks, which gate did you come out of? And he said, not my gate. And then he says, nosy tray, which we can assume is traitor. So, foreshadowing.
Oh, dun dun dun. Interesting. But yeah, to your point, I do think she brings back her memories. She even says it later on when we go later. Yeah, she says it's because of pain. Like she's able to, if she holds on to pain or hurts herself beforehand, she can keep the memory, which is interesting.
Like in the second part, I think it's like her lips.
Yeah.
Or something, biting her lips.
Yeah. So on day 2, in the second day, we meet her mentor, Nick, who, of course, is hot as he is. Oh, as they all are. What ends up happening is she gets called into the dean's office, who they think that they're going to get expelled, her and Alice, but then they end up not getting expelled, but they get assigned a mentor in order to ensure that they're not getting into trouble and have a good, time while they're there. So her mentor is Nick. She ignores his texts for a while until eventually they meet after class. He follows her to where she's having dinner or something like that. And Nick is described as a tall white boy with tousled straw blonde hair. Look, we got a non-black haired guy and the bluest eyes I've ever seen. He's not built like any 17-year-old I know, and he has broad shoulders, a narrow waist, and the fresh laundry and cedar scent. Again with the scents. Always the scents are always there. How did you feel about Nick? I have to admit, when he showed up, I was like, oh, okay, who is this second male character? Who are you? Do I like you? I don't know. How do you feel?
I agree. I had a feeling he'd continue being a part of the story just with how incessantly he was texting her.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is a great way to continue building out the main characters. Of course your mentor is going to be an important character in this book. I had a feeling. But I agree. I'm like, oh, another Aryan race boy.
Another Aryan race boy. Well, it took me a second when we move forward. It took me a second to realize oh, all the people in the Legendborn are white. That ends up becoming the point, which I actually didn't realize, which she makes it a point later on, which makes sense. Getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but that makes sense. Another white boy.
Yeah, I didn't realize that till I read a synopsis where that's explained. I'm like, oh, okay. All right.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's interesting for it to be, I think a lot of the books I've read that do have diversity, but it's they just try to integrate it. Whereas I think this book is making the point to show you that this is a particular thing. It is part of her experience that she is feels, out of place in a lot of these situations, that she's the only Black woman there, which I think is interesting. Not something I've read in a long time.
It's strategic. Yeah.
Yeah. That's part of the plot. But anyway, so as she's talking to Nick, she sees this rotting neon green flame and she starts to run towards it. And as she's running, she finds that there's a hellhound that's there who ends up chasing after her. And as Bree is running towards the Hellhound, Nick ends up coming and tries to save her from the Hellhound, but then the end ends up being the opposite, where then Bree calls the Hellhound to her in order to save Nick from the Hellhound, which, like, good for her. She's brave, but ends up getting not like bitten by the Hellhound, but it looks like she just gets like saliva on her, which causes this like terrible burn. It's almost like a corrosive acid that ends up like hurting her skin, almost like it's like burning away at her skin. She wakes up to find herself in this like room where Nick is there, and she gets introduced into this Legendborn world that she didn't know about in this hospital. She learns about the ether, which is a mage flame that is a byproduct of the mages the mages can be the only ones that can produce this type of magic. And they can construct it out of some weapon, or construct a weapon or something out of ether. There are all these different kinds of demons. She'd already met the incel, but then she learns about the Hellhound, and they're all called the Shadowborn, demon kind. And some can affect mortals and some can't. Like the Hellhound could affect mortals, like herself. The mesmer, which was what Selwyn tried to use on her to like erase her memories, which Nick notices when she says that she brought her memories back. Nick tells her to not tell Selwyn that happened, and as Selwyn will try to remove her memories again, which is interesting that she's the only one so far that can, not be affected by the mesmer. How did you feel about that?
I kind of figured that would happen because of books. We've talked about this, like tropes / like things we just notice in these books, which like it's not a negative, but I just noticed like the main characters tend to have like a special power. Like you see Bella from Twilight, who is the only person ever that Edward has encountered that he can't resist, her smell. Aelin Galathinius, Fourth Wing, Violet, they special powers. So I figured something would be different. But I like the way that they introduced that like she doesn't even fully understand it, and they don't understand it either, which is cool. The magical
yeah that she's the first one so far that they've seen. But yeah, you're right, it's always like the lead character who has the special power that doesn't get affected. So I'll be interested to see how that gets resolved, or how they figure that out moving forward. That'll be interesting. So she basically gets introduced to all the magic system in this world, which is a lot. And I'll be honest, it kind of took me, I think these are the moments in books when, as I'm reading it, I'm like, I don't understand everything right now, but I will over time. Like the info dumps are good, but my brain will not really practically understand it until further into the series. So sometimes when it comes to these moments, I'm like, okay, I appreciate this. I will understand later.
I will bookmark this page.
Yeah.
And then I'll refer back to it. I felt the same way. That it's just a lot. And they don't fully understand it, or at least she doesn't. And so I'm like, okay. I like how she exposed this to us, this like magical, the world building. But yeah, it was like, okay, write it down and then we'll move on.
Yeah. It's one of those things I'm like a learn by immersion kind of person. I think most people are. So I'll like understand as I just get immersed more into the world. That's like more so you don't even need to explain it sometimes. I'll just like understand as I'm interacting in this world, as like reading about it. You'll start to get it. You don't always have to just like lay it all out. But this was good because we're just getting introduced to it. So I think it's good to have this here, but I'm hoping moving forward I'll just start to understand it by like osmosis. Just take it all in.
Yeah. As she goes through challenges and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She
also here learns about like the fact that this is like potential, like she hears the words of that this might be related to like the Arthurian tales of like, because she hears about like Merlin's and then pages from chapters, and then like he thought she was a northern or western spy. So then you're like, okay, so this is a worldwide thing. This is a global thing.
It's like a worldwide thing. This is a larger organization. And I think here she also realizes that, yeah, the cop that she saw at her mom's, like when her mom died, is most likely involved. She starts to put those pieces together. And I think this is also when she puts together that possibly her mom was killed by somebody in the Legendborn world. I believe this is around this time.
Yes. So within the third day, she starts to connect it. She starts piecing it together.
Yeah, which makes sense. That's interesting. Which was a surprise to me, to be honest. Again, I missed the whole like shimmery thing on her mom, like during that prologue. So I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's interesting. I totally just didn't connect it. when I was first reading it. It is very Shadowhunters, very like similar to the Shadowhunters series to me, which I wonder if the author read those books. I get the sense that she probably did.
That's cool. Yeah. We'll have to Google to see if it's connected. I'm curious now too.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So the plot continues to move super fast. We're only on the 3rd day by the end, towards the end of part 1. And so when Bree wakes up, she wakes up in her dorm room, and I think it's funny that the conflict she has with Alice, that like she literally can't tell Alice because if she tells her, Alice is going to think she's crazy, but Alice assumes that she went out for a night drinking and she saw that Nick had brought her to the room, and she's like, I can't believe you did that. We were about to get kicked out. And I just think I'm just imagining how funny that would be in like a TV show. Like, you know.
It's also incredibly frustrating, but I think it does, like, it's good. Like, it's one of those moments where you feel the frustration of the main character because you're like, you cannot explain this regardless, so you're stuck in this just like terrible situation, which I think was just a good job of the author, how she did that. Like, you cannot explain yourself. It's one of those moments where like the misunderstanding trope works because you can't do anything about it.
It's like logical. Like if she did try and explain, it'd be like, you need to go to therapy. Yeah,
exactly. It's like I hate the misunderstanding trope, but this is the only way to do it because you're like, well, you can't explain this. What are you supposed to do?
So we get another example that when Bree's mesmered, she forgets a little bit about what happens within like a short time period, but then begins to remember. And she might be able to remember through pain is our hypothesis, like some sort of pain before or after she's mesmered, she can bring back those memories. So anyway, she ends up joining the classes with Nick, which is just like, girl, you're gonna get expelled. Please go to your own classes. 3rd day. Stop following
she
them. But
she's
determined. And I put this in here that, again, if you've read Throne of Glass, there's like a meme of like everyone saying, Aelin, no. And then she still goes and does it. And Bree is also as headstrong as some of these main characters who just are going to do it. Like she has to figure out how her mom died. And so it makes sense. And so she goes to join classes with Nick. She kind of tries to find more info. He's not really giving her much. And then she ends up going and searching for the Order of the Round Table's lodge. So through some Googling, Bree ends up finding where the Order of the Round Table's lodge is and decides to go there to find more information from Nick. And when she knocks on the door, she's greeted by someone named Sarah, who's described as a pixie-like girl who sounds very much like Alice Cullen. So we're getting these like Twilight themes throughout here. But when she's invited in and she's sent to like a waiting area until Nick can come because he doesn't live there, she notices that it's very like medieval castle, like you can tell that this is like an old building. And I remember when Bella like ends up going to the Cullens house, it was clear that this isn't like a frat for kids. For students, like these people might be older. So I was curious like what your thoughts were when you were reading how the place where like the castle was described, their lodge.
It reminds me a little bit of Vampire Diaries-esque. I know you didn't watch that, but Vampire Diaries, the Salvatore brothers live in this like very bougie kind of like old, it's not a castle, but it's this old house. That's what I was picturing in my mind as this was being described. I'm just surprised that she was able to just find it via a Google search, like you were saying. I just find that really funny. Like Order of the Round Table, and you just can find it. Like, okay, that's fine, no worries, no big deal. I'll be interested to see how this like continues to move forward. Like, how do they stay secretive while they're kind of very obvious in this world? I don't know. I just find that interesting. And how do you just have this like massive castle in the middle of UNC's campus? Who knows? But I guess the frat houses can be really big.
That's true. And she said it was like off of like what would be like the beaten path for frat houses. It's like surrounded by trees.
Okay.
So they're like trying, but not really.
They're trying. They're like a little less secretive. But
they're like, you can come knock on our door. That's okay.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. They seem friendly.
And so the chapter kind of ends with her talking to Nick and crying. Nick's obviously angry at her, and she's trying to convince him to let her stay so that she can ask questions because she really wants to know how her mom died. And so she ends up explaining to Nick like why she's there. Her mother died. She has to figure it out. And eventually he agrees to have her as his page. And so it's really funny how she did that. I don't know if I could do that, convince someone just by a conversation, but yeah. And then he ends up talking about like he eventually would have to convince these regents, which seem like a society that bend to Legendborns. Nick apparently like he's technically Legendborn because he was born into it, but I think he decided to turn away from like the benefits of being Legendborn. But yeah, it kind of reminded me of the Volturi. Again, I'm going to keep making Twilight references, but that's what I thought of when I first heard about like the society that they have.
Yeah, they're like they come from the original like 13 families, I guess, of the Round Table, and he's a descendant of that. And this is around the time when Bree notices that they're all white, which makes sense historically as well. So she stands out. But yeah, he like has rejected it, and then by taking on Bree as his page, that he's like reclaiming his title or something like that. I'm suspicious of Nick. I'll have to say, I'm suspicious of him. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel suspicious of everyone. It's just like the way these books have gone. It's like I know we're obviously going to like Selwyn at some point, but yeah, I didn't like have thoughts on like whether I trusted Nick or not. I just knew he'd be a part of the plot for longer than just like I'm your mentor.
Yeah, for sure. As proven, he is. He's going to be clearly a main character of sorts. But yeah, I agree. Selwyn will have like you just know by the way he's described that Selwyn will be, I believe, the main lead, the main male lead at some point. We just haven't met him yet, or I haven't talked to him really yet. So that's why I'm suspicious of Nick. I'm like, I know how this goes. So who are you?
Yeah. When are you going to let us down?
Yeah. When are you going to disappoint me? Because I'm waiting. Even though he's the nicer guy at the moment, but it's always the nice guys.
Always the nice guys.
The nice guys. Which this is a good transition into the predictions. That is one of my predictions, is that something's going to happen with Nick. I don't know what. I'm not sure. And I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. I don't think I am. I think something's going to happen with him. I did write down originally that I thought her mom was something in the order, but I actually don't agree with that anymore, considering now that we've talked about it and how like the point is that they're all white. I don't think her mom is involved in the order, but she's tangentially related, and I don't think she's actually dead. The mothers are never dead. The parents are never dead.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. After like I had read that like Black people of color can't be in the order, I did think like too, like maybe she's involved, she's higher up, and that's why they killed her. But I think there's something involved with her. Okay, I do think she's still alive. And then also the Isel, the monster, said, nosy traitor. So why are these supposed good guys traitors? There must be something deeper. And I just feel like there's something we're going to be learning about like the dynamic of the order that Nick doesn't agree with, and that Selwyn is protecting. There's something here beyond the racism. There must be something involved with power or something. And also, yeah, I'm curious where her mother is if she's not close by.
Yeah, agreed. I agree with that.
The Isel also mentioned like not my gate, so I'm worried about what that means, and like if it's some sort of like there's other gates opening and they're being opened by someone's growing power, something's happening. But yeah, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that is similar to what I was gonna say, because I mean the whole point, Bree thinks that Legendborn killed her mom at this point for some reason, because some Legendborn will kill humans to protect their secret. So maybe her mom knows something. Maybe her mom's the one that's opening these gates. I don't know. Her mom is involved somehow that has made her, a convict in the Legendborn universe. Maybe. I don't know.
I wonder if, and this was my hypothesis, I'm curious if you thought about it too, if the Isel are viewed as monsters with some sort of like mentally they're viewed as a monster, but actually they're like people of color, people fighting back against the order. And they're considered like, because why I'm curious why he would say traitor, but I am curious about like if her mom is leading this rebel team
maybe
against the order that's very white. So.
Yeah. And also like Nick he rejected his family for some reason. What's that reason? So that's a good point too. Okay. That's interesting. I didn't think about that. But
lots of theories.
Yeah. We'll see. This will be fun. So like we can actually see if we're right or not. Because I feel like sometimes I just think these things, or I'll be like, I totally thought of that, but I have no proof. If I actually did think, no one believes me. Now we have proof.
Now we have recorded proof of our thoughts.
We do.
We'll see how wrong or right we were.
Or how wrong or right we are. Exactly. And that is part 1 of Legendborn. Next week, we will be doing chapters 10 through 25. It's a little bit longer, but I get the sense this is probably a good bulk of the book. So come back for that to listen to us chat about part 2 of this book. Let us know what questions you have, what thoughts you have on the book. If you think our predictions are crazy or right. We haven't looked up any spoilers. I literally know nothing about this book, which is not always true when I start books, but I can honestly say this one, I really don't know much. I don't know anything about what happens. So this will be fun to see what our predictions are. Yeah, let us know what your predictions are, what your thoughts are on the book, and if you'll join us for the live show on June 7th. We would love to see what interest is for that. But you can follow us on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube at fangirlfeelspod. We also have an email. We haven't talked about this, but you can email actually our questions at fangirlfeelspod@gmail.com. If you want to email us the questions, that might be easier if you're on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We'd love to hear your questions or your thoughts, and we can read them as we move through this discussion. And yeah, I think that's it. Do we have anything else?
I think that's it.
I think that's it. All right. Tune in next week where we talk about part 2, and we'll be back next week. All right. Until then. Bye. Bye.
I'm just gonna do that again. It's Arthurian. Why can't I say this? Suddenly I don't speak English. Remember?
Called A Modern Day Twist on Arthurian Legend. I don't even know how you say it. Arthurian? Arthurian?
Fuck it. All right.
It's fine.